The UK will vote on its membership of the EU on June 23rd. Asset managers and Brexit is a special report written by Ashley Kovas, senior regulatory intelligence expert at Thomson Reuters. It explores the implications of an exit from Europe on asset management regulatory regimes. And Ashley joins me in the studio now. There is a lot to talk about here. Just give us a brief summary of what Brexit means generally for asset managers.
Well, the difficulty with doing that, Axel, is actually the lack of evidence that there is around what the post-Brexit world would look like. And this is not just an issue for asset managers, but for everybody else, quite frankly. Because unless we know what that deal will look like, the position for asset managers is difficult to discern. So where I would like to start is really to look at the worst case scenario, which would be where the UK left the European Union and didn't have any other kind of deal with the European Union to take forward. Obviously, that's not the situation we would be in, but as a starting point for thinking, that would be a good place to begin.
And a good way of doing that is looking at the three EU regulatory regimes that impact asset managers. Let's start with UCITS. What is the situation with UCITS?
Okay, well, the first thing to say about UCITS is that it's an international fund brand. So, UCITS funds are given preferential access to retail markets, not just in Europe, but also around the world, particularly in Asia. So very important brand that we would obviously lose as part of a Brexit situation. The directive deals with three parties. It deals essentially with the fund itself, with its management company, and with the fund's depository. A UCITS fund that's domiciled in the UK post-Brexit would lose its UCITS status, so would become a non-UCITS fund. The management company of a UCITS, if a UK management company, would obviously cease to be a management company. Any UCITS funds that management company had under management elsewhere in Europe would continue to be UCITS, but wouldn't have a management company, so they would need to replace the management company. And the depository has to be in the same domicile as the fund. So if there are no UCITS funds in the UK anymore, there will be no depositories able to operate here either as in the UCITS world.
Okay, that's UCITS. Is it broadly the same under AIFMD, or is that a little bit more complex?
AIFMD is a little bit more complex because as a regime, it actually deals with a situation of non-EU alternative managers and non-EU funds. Smaller alternative investment fund managers may actually find themselves better off in a Brexit situation because at the moment they have some obligations under the directive, but they don't get the passport, so they don't get any benefits from it. But that would depend on the FCA turning off the rules that apply to them that come from AIFMD, and there's no guarantee that the FCA would necessarily do that. At the moment, the only working passport for alternative funds is the one which applies to an alternative fund which is domiciled in the EU, and the manager is also in the EU. So obviously, if the UK were to leave the EU, that passport would no longer be available. It is possible under the directive for jurisdictions to be considered to be equivalent. And ESMA, the European regulator, would be able to have a look at the UK from that perspective. One would hope that the UK would pass that particular test, but any changes we might make to the regime post-Brexit would put that at risk.
And is it tempting fate to say it's going to be relatively more simple under MiFID?
MiFID, I think, is a simpler process because essentially the situation at the moment is the FCA is a regulator that can grant MiFID authorization. Post-Brexit, under the worst-case scenario, it wouldn't be able to grant that authorization anymore, so it would not be possible for UK firms to use the passport.
You said this was the worst case scenario. Will the UK, do you think, be able to negotiate a deal that would be as good as it currently enjoys as a member state?
Personally, I think that's unlikely. And of course, this is a personal view. The UK market is a very important one for Europe, and if we were to renegotiate our engagement with Europe, we would be in a strong bargaining position as an important market. But the flip side of that is that all the protections that we currently are subject to in European law, other member states would want us to continue to comply with them, because our firms would continue to have passport access to their retail markets, and they would want those same protections to apply. So we may find ourselves at least in the same position that we are now in terms of the regulation that applied in order to get into the European market. Some member states might want the position to be worse on the basis that if it's not, worse for a former EU member state, then it kind of makes EU membership
absolutely.
pointless.
And you would imagine that member states would what would guide this would be acting in their best economic interests, right?
Well, yes, you would hope so, but not necessarily exclusively in that respect. The UK sees the EU as a kind of glorified customs union. Whereas for other member states in the European Union, it's much more than that. It's about being an engine of social progress for many countries. Preserving the integrity of the European Union will be front and centre for many countries, and that might even be to the extent of some economic benefit. So they might not think purely from a commercial perspective.
Final question: If we do vote in favour of Brexit, it seems unlikely that any new UK deal with the EU will be in place. What will happen in that event, do you think?
Well, there will obviously be a state of considerable uncertainty. It's reckoned that it will take 2 or 3 years for the UK to get out of the European Union, during which time some kind of deal will be negotiated for our continuing engagement. Firms that wish to resolve that uncertainty may find themselves establishing an entity inside the European Union. So business may move from the UK into France or Germany, so that firms can be certain that they can carry on operating in the way that they operate. I mean, to take an example, marketing a UK UCITS fund in the period between the vote and actually leaving the EU be very difficult. I mean, who would buy such a fund in the knowledge that it's about to cease to be a UCITS? So very tricky sort of couple of years, I think, post if there were a vote to leave.
Yeah. All right. Ashley, thank you very much indeed. Ashley Kovas, Senior Regulatory Intelligence Expert here at Thomson Reuters. June 23rd, of course, the vote. Clearly plenty at stake for the asset management industry. Get all the news, analysis and practical guidance you need for your firm on Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence.